Good day, everyone. Today, we will learn about Araling Panlipunan. In this discussion, you will learn three important topics. First is about the Philippines, second is the early Filipinos, and third is the Philippine Presidents. About the Philippines. Overview. The Philippines is comprised of 7,110 islands with a land area of about 300,000 square kilometers. The country has a total of 96,000 square kilometers of agricultural land, which is about 32% of the total land area. These lands are utilized for the plantation of palay, corn, fruit, trees, root crops, vegetables, coconut, sugarcane, and others. Land. The Philippines' primary source of livelihood is its fertile land. Rich, wide plains suitable for farming are found in the Cagayan Valley, Central Luzon, Southwestern Bicol, Panay, Negros, Davao, Cotabato, Agusan, and Bukidnon. The country's six major crops are rice, corn, sugarcane, coconut, abaca, and tobacco. Except for rice and corn, all these products are exported along with bananas and pineapples. Forest. The Philippines also boasts of wide tracts of lush green forest. In fact, almost half of the country's total land area is forested. 60% of these forests are found in Mindanao. As you can see in the graph, a data from the Forest Management Bureau in the year 2007, there is a total forest area of 6,521,548 hectares, which comprises 22% of the land area. 55% of it is comprised of the open forest, 38% of it is closed forest, 4% of it is plantation, and 3% of it is comprised of the mangroves. Mineral resources. Except for petroleum and a number of metals, mineral resources abound in the Philippine soil. The country's mineral deposits can be classified into metals and non-metals. Our metal deposits are estimated at 21.5 billion metric tons, while non-metal deposits are projected at 19.3 billion metric tons. Nickel ranks first in terms of deposits and size. It is found in Surigao del Norte, Davao, Palawan, Romblon, and Samar. Iron is found in Ilocos Norte, Nueva Ecija, Camarines Norte, and Cotabato, while copper in Zambales, Batangas, Mindoro, Panay, and Negros. Among non-metal deposits, the most abundant are cement, lime, and marble. Other non-metals include asbestos, clay, guano, asphalt, feldspar, sulfur, talc, silicon, phosphate, and marble. Natural resources. The Philippines is rich in natural resources. It has fertile, arable lands, diverse flora and fauna, extensive coastlines, and rich mineral deposits. About 30% of the land area of the country was determined to be geologically prospective by the Philippine Mines and Geosciences Bureau, but only 1.5% of country's land area is covered with mining permits. Despite the rich natural resources of the Philippines, the government is restricting its exploitation. A logging ban is imposed on many areas of the country, and only in selected areas are sustainable logging allowed. However, illegal logging and small-scale illegal mining continues in many areas. In July 2012, President Benigno Aquino III ordered a stop to all mining activities in all 78 areas protected and ecotourism sites. A positive step in the right direction to protect the natural resources of the Philippines. Bodies of water. The Philippines boasts of many different kinds of natural water forms such as bays, rivers, lakes, falls, gulfs, straits, and swamps. Because it is made up of islands, the country's coastline, if laid end to end, would measure around 17.5 thousand kilometers. The Philippines is blessed with excellent natural harbors for ports like Manila Bay. The three largest rivers in the country are the Cagayan River in northern Luzon, the Rio Grande de Mindanao, and the Agusan River, also in Mindanao. Also noteworthy in terms of size are the Agno, Pasig, Angat Pampanga, and Bicol rivers in Luzon. Most popular among tourists is the famous underground river in Palawan. Aside from rivers, the country also abounds with lakes. Easily, the most famous is the heart-shaped Laguna de Bay. Other famous lakes are the Taal in Batangas, Sampaloc in Laguna, Buhi and Bulusan in Bicol, Nauhan in Mindoro Oriental, and Lanao and Mainit in Mindanao. Generating power for the nation's growth are the magnificent waterfalls that serve as tourist attractions as well. The biggest waterfalls is the Maria Cristina Falls, which can be found in the northwestern part of Lanao Province in Mindanao, while the most popular is Pagsanhan Falls in Laguna, where tourists came in droves. Fishery resources. With its territorial waters measuring as much as 1.67 million square kilometers and located in the world's fishing center, the Philippines is definitely rich in marine resources. Of the 2,400 fish species found in the country, 65 have good commercial value. Other marine products include corals, pearls, crabs, and seaweeds. Some of the country's best saltwater fishing areas are found in Sintangki Island in Sulu Estancia in Bohol, Malampaya in Palawan, Lingayen Gulf in Pangasinan, San Miguel Lake in Camarines Norte, Bantayan Channel in Cebu, and the seas of Quezon and Sorsogon. On the other hand, among our biggest water fishing areas are Laguna de Bay, Bombon Lake in Batangas, Bato Lake in Camarines Sur, Nauhan Lake in Mindoro, and Mainit Lake in Agusan del Norte. Migration theory. The first migrants were what they archaic the Dawn men, or cavemen because they lived in caves. The Dawn men resembled Java men, Peking men, and other Asian Homo sapiens who existed about 250,000 years ago. They did not have any knowledge of agriculture and lived by hunting and fishing. It was precisely in search of food that they came to the Philippines by way of the land bridges that connected the Philippines and Indonesia. Owing perhaps to their migratory nature, they eventually left the Philippines for destinations unknown. The second group of migrants was composed of dark-skinned pygmies called Itas or Negritos. About 30,000 years ago, they crossed the land bridges from Malaya, Borneo, and Australia until they reached Palawan, Mindoro, and Mindanao. They were pygmies who went around practically naked and were good at hunting, fishing, and food gathering. They used spears and small flintstones weapons. Because of the disappearance of the land bridges, the third wave of migrants was necessarily skilled in seafaring. These were the Indonesians who came to the islands in boats. They were more advanced than the Itas in that they had tools made out of stone and steel, which enabled them to build sturdier houses. They engaged in farming and mining and used materials made of brass, and they wore clothing and other body ornaments. Last to migrate to the Philippines, according to Bayer, were Malays. They were believed to have come from Java, Sumatra, Borneo, and the Malay Peninsula more than 2,000 years ago. Like the Indonesians, they also traveled in boats. The Malays were brown-skinned and of medium height, with straight black hair and flat noses. Their technology was said to be more advanced than that of their predecessors. They engaged in pottery, weaving, jewelry making, and metal smelting, and introduced the irrigation system in rice planting. The second theory is Ocano's theory. Renowned Filipino anthropologist Felipe Landa Ocano disputes Bayer's belief that Filipinos descended from Negritos and Malays who migrated to the Philippines thousands of years ago. According to Ocano, it is difficult to prove that Negritos were the first inhabitants of this country. The only thing that can positively concluded from fossil evidence, he says, is that the first men who came to the Philippines also went to New Guinea, Java, Borneo, and Australia. In 1962, a skull cap and a portion of a jaw presumed to be a human origin were found in the Tabuan caves of Palawan by archaeologists Robert Fox and Manuel Santiago, who both worked for the National Museum. Carbon dating placed their age at 21,000 to 22,000 years. This proves, Ocano argues, that man came earlier to the Philippines than to the Malay Peninsula. Therefore, the first inhabitants of our islands could not have come from the region. The Tabuan man is said to resemble Java man and Peking man. He gathered fruits, leaves, and plants for his food. He hunted with weapons made of stone. Although further research is still being done on his life and culture, evidence shows that he was already capable of using his brain in order to survive and keep himself safe. Instead of the migration theory, Ocano advances the evolution theory as a better explanation of how our country was first inhabited by human beings. Ocano believes that the first people of Southeast Asia were products of a long process of evolution and migration. His research indicates that they shared more or less the same culture, beliefs, practices, and even similar tools and implements. These people eventually went their separate ways. Some migrated to the Philippines, the others to New Guinea, Java, and Borneo. Proof, Ocano says, can be found in the fossils discovered in different parts of Southeast Asia, as well as the recorded migrations of other peoples from the Asian mainland when history began to unfold. The third and last topic of today's session are the Philippine Presidents. Article 7, Section 1 of the 1987 Constitution vests executive power on the President of the Philippines. The President is the head of state and head of government and functions as the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of the Philippines. As Chief Executive, the President exercises control over all the executive departments, bureaus, and offices. The President of the Philippines is elected by direct vote by the people for a term of 6 years. He may only serve for one term and is ineligible for re-election. The term of the President of the Philippines starts at noon of 30th day of June after the election. The qualifications for an individual aspiring to become the President of the Philippines are outlined in Article 7, Section 2 of the 1987 Constitution. According to the Constitution, an individual may become president provided he or she meets the following criteria. First is you have to be a natural-born Filipino. Second, you are a registered voter. Third is you must be able to read and write. Fourth is that you are 40 years of age at the day of the election. And lastly, you must have resided in the Philippines 10 years before the election is held. Here is the timeline of the Philippine presidents. From the First Republic, then to be followed by the Commonwealth period, the Second Republic, Third Republic, Fourth Republic, and the Fifth Republic. Emilio F. Aguinaldo, from January 23, 1899 to April 1, 1901. He was the first president of the Philippines First Republic. He was the youngest president who became the country's leader at the age of 28. He was also the longest-lived president who died when he was 94. He was one of the active leaders of KKK. He signed the Pact of Biak na Bato and known as the President of the Revolutionary Government. He fought against the Spanish and Americans to retain our independence. Manuel L. Quezon, from November 15, 1935 to August 1, 1944. He was known as the father of national language or ama ng wikang pambansa. He was the first Senate President elected as President of the Philippines. He was the first president elected through a national election. He was also the first president under the Commonwealth period. He created the National Council of Education. He initiated women's suffrage in the Philippines during the Commonwealth. He made Tagalog or Filipino as the national language of the Philippines. A province, a city, a bridge, and a university in Manila were named after him, and his body lies within the special monument on Quezon Memorial Circle. Jose P. Laurel, from October 14, 1943 to August 17, 1945. He was third to sit at the office during the Japanese occupation of World War II. He was the only Filipino president to have been shot outside of combat. He was considered as the legitimate president of the Philippines. He organized the Kalibapi or the Kapisanan sa Paglilingkod sa Bagong Pilipinas. He declared martial law in the year 1944, and he and his family developed the establishment of Lyceum of the Philippines. Sergio S. Osmeña, from August 1, 1944 to May 28, 1946. He was the second president of the Commonwealth. He succeeded Quezon after his death. He was 65 when he became president, making him the oldest president to hold office. He was the first Visayan to become president. He joined U.S. General Douglas MacArthur in Leyte on October 20, 1944, starting the freedom of the Philippines from the Japanese during the Second World War. During his time, the Philippine National Bank has been rehabilitated and the country joined the International Monetary Fund. In his time, the Bell Trade Act was approved by the U.S. Congress. Manuel A. Rojas, from May 28, 1946 to April 15, 1948. He was the fifth president of the Philippines overall, but he was considered as the third and last president under the Commonwealth and the first of the Third Republic of the Philippines. He only sat in the office for 1 year, 10 months, and 18 days. He was inaugurated as the new and first president of the new republic because the Philippines was finally free after the Second World War. In his time, the country has started reconstruction from war damage, and the Philippines started breathing without foreign rule. Under his term, the Philippine Rehabilitation Act and the Philippine Trade Act laws were accepted by the Congress. Elpidio R. Quirino, from April 17, 1948 to December 13, 1953. He was the vice president at the time of Rojas and became president when the latter died in 1948. Under his term, Hukbalahap movement was active. He created the Social Security Commission. He also created Integrity Board to monitor graft and corruption. In 1948, Quezon City was the capital of the Philippines. At his time, peso and dollar exchange rate was $1 is equivalent to 2 pesos. Ramon F Magsaysay, from December 13, 1953 to March 17, 1957. He was born in Iba, Zambales. He was a military governor and engineer. He was the chairman of the Committee on Guerrilla Affairs. He was the first president sworn into office wearing Barong Tagalog in his inauguration. His presidency was referred as the Philippines' golden years, for it was the cleanest and zero corruption. The Philippines was ranked second in Asia's clean and well-governed countries. He established national resettlement and rehabilitation administration among his agrarian reforms. He died on a plane crash on March 17, 1957 in Mount Manunggal, Balamban, Cebu. Carlos P. Garcia, from March 18, 1957 to December 13, 1961. He was a lawyer, poet, teacher, and guerrilla leader. Born from Bohol, he was the vice president of Magsaysay and secretary of foreign affairs for 4 years. He became president when Magsaysay died in 1957. He was known for the Filipino First policy. He established the austerity program focusing on Filipino trade and commerce. He was known as the Prince of Visayan poets and the Bard from Bohol. During his term, cultural arts was revived. He was the first president to have his remains buried at the libingan ng mga bayani. Diosdado P. Macapagal, from December 13, 1961 to December 13, 1965. He was born in Lubao, Pampanga. He is the father of Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, the 14th and second woman president of the Philippines. He was a lawyer and a professor too. He established the first land reform law. He placed the Philippines currency, the peso, on the currency exchange market. He made June 12, 1898 as the Philippines' Independence Day. He signed the minimum wage law and signed the creation of the Philippine Veterans Bank. Ferdinand E Marcos, from December 13, 1965 to February 25, 1986. Born from Sarat, Ilocos Norte, Ferdinand Edralin Marcos was a lawyer and Senate President for 3 years. He was the first president to win a second term. He declared martial law on September 22, 1972, and he increased the size of the Philippine military and armed forces. In 1980, GNP was 4 times greater than 1972. In 1986, the Philippines was one of the most indebted countries in Asia. His term was the most controversial and a messy one. Their family was rumored to have embezzled public funds to Switzerland and other wealthy nations. He built more schools, roads, bridges, hospitals, and infrastructures than all former presidents did combined. He is the only president whose remains interred inside a refrigerated crypt. Corazon C. Aquino, from February 25, 1986 to June 13, 1992. She is the wife of Benigno Aquino Jr., who was assassinated during the Marcos regime. She was the most prominent figure of the 1986 People Power Revolution, which ended the two-decade rule of President Ferdinand Marcos. She was named Woman of the Year in 1986 by the Time magazine. She was the first woman president of the Philippines and Asia. She was known to bring back democracy in the country. She abolished the 1973 Marcos Constitution and brought the new Constitution of the Philippines and reorganized the structure of the executive branch of government. And she signed the Family Code of 1987. Fidel V Ramos, from June 13, 1992 to June 13, 1998. He was the Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces of the Philippines before he became a president. During his time, the Philippines was cited as Asia's next economic tiger because he brought back economic growth. In 1998, the Philippines celebrated centennial independence. He's the only Filipino who received British knighthood from the United Kingdom, which was bestowed by Queen Elizabeth II. He also led the fourth APEC summit held in the Philippines, and his Philippines 2000 vision made the Philippine Stock Exchange one of the best in the world in the mid-90s. Finally, he signed the peace talks and agreement with the MNLF. Joseph E. Estrada, from June 13, 1998 to January 20, 2001. He was known as Erap. He was the first president who was a famous film actor. His governance had so many downs due to controversies, impeachment, and slow economic growth. During his time, the MILF's headquarters and camps were captured. He joined other leaders and politicians who supported against the charter change. He was among the Magnificent 12 who voted for the termination of the Philippines and U.S. military bases agreement from Clark Air Base and Subic Naval Base. Gloria M Arroyo, from January 20, 2001 to June 30, 2010. She was the daughter of former President Diosdado Macapagal. She was the second female president of the country. She was the first president to have oath-taking outside Luzon. She is also an ex-professor of economics at the Ateneo de Manila University, where Noynoy Aquino was one of her students. She regained higher economic growth than the past three presidents before her. Peso became the best-performing currency of the year in Asia in 2007, and expanded value-added tax or EVAT law was implemented under her term. Benigno C Aquino III, from June 30, 2010 to June 30, 2016. He was the son of the first female president of the Philippines and Asia, Corazon Aquino. He joined the House of Representatives and the Senate before his presidency. He is the first president who is a bachelor, unmarried, and has no children. He created the No Wangwang policy, and this was practiced on his inaugural address. He initiated the K-12 education in the Philippines, and he renamed the Office of the Press Secretary into Presidential Communications Operations Office and appointed new officers. Rodrigo R. Duterte, from June 30, 2016 to the present. In his first 6 months in office, more than 6,000 people were killed in Duterte's war on drugs. A fraction of those deaths occurred during police operations, and the overwhelming majority were extrajudicial killings by death squads. Human rights organizations and Roman Catholic officials spoke out against the bloodshed, but Duterte responded by accusing the church of corruption and the sexual abuse of children. Second, the first tax reform law, or the Tax Reform for Acceleration and Inclusion or TRAIN law, was signed in December 2017. It's primarily a revenue-generating measure to fund the administration's infrastructure program, health, education, and social services programs. But it is also allowed Filipinos to keep more of their salary while imposing higher taxes on sugar-sweetened drinks, cigarettes, cars, and fuel, which is a burden on poor Filipinos. Third is the signing, then ratification of the Bangsamoro Organic Law is a major achievement for both the Mindanaoan President and Congress. Duterte has appointed officials to lead the new Bangsamoro government and continues to be involved in shepherding the region. Fourth, beginning with a campaign promise to give the poorest Filipinos access to hospitals and medicines, Duterte ended up pushing for and signing the Universal Health Care Law with the help of Congress. Fifth, although it was never a campaign promise, Duterte pushed for the enactment of the free tertiary education law against the advice of his economic managers. The government's fiscalizers now face the challenge of finding funding for this expensive law every year, but it's a welcome development for Filipino families everywhere. Sixth, Duterte's simple promise to reduce processing of government permits to 3 days has branched into various presidential actions meant to cut red tape. He signed the Ease of Doing Business Act, issued an executive order for faster anti-poverty services, put up the 8888 hotline for citizen complaints, and constantly reminds cabinet members to streamline processes in their departments. Seventh, promising to build legacy railways during his term, Duterte has thrown his support for his economic managers' Build, Build, Build program. Eighth and last, some of Duterte's most decisive policies were on the environment. In fell verbal swoops, he closed world-famous Boracay for rehabilitation, jump-started efforts to clean Manila Bay and Laguna Lake, and got Canada to take back its illegal garbage stranded in the Philippines for 6 years. He's threatened mining companies and local government officials who don't follow environmental regulations. And that's the end of our discussion, and I hope you learned something. Thank you for watching.